Good morning, YouTube, and happy Friday. So, today I want to bring a video to you about Donald Trump having people who disagree with him on the 2020 election. He's having some of those people investigated by the Department of Justice. So there's this guy, his name is Chris Krebs. I believe I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He was the director of cybersecurity and infrastructure, and he basically testified that the 2020 election was one of the most secure elections and it was basically not stolen. And Donald Trump is having him investigated by the DOJ, by the Department of Justice. No matter your political ideologies, no matter your political affiliations, this should scare every single American. Because in this country, we have a right to our own opinion. We have, of course, we have First Amendment rights. We have freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And the fact that our president is investigating a person because that person disagreed with his lie about the 2020 election should scare everyone, right? So on Abby Phillips, we had a panel. It was Anna Navarro, it was Tiffany Cross, it was Scott Jennings, it was Shermichael, his last name is Singleton, I believe, Abby Phillips, and then they had a legal analyst, and I believe his name was Michael Moore. And so they were having a conversation, and Abby literally just asked Shermichael a question. She asked directly Shermichael and Scott Jennings a question whether or not it was wrong to have your political opponent investigated. We're going to see their answers throughout the video because I've chopped it up where I want to show you guys a clip and then I want to talk a little bit and then I'll show you guys another clip and then I'll talk after. So I want you guys to take a look at this first clip. It basically introduced the topic and then we're going to get into Shermichael's response. We're going to get into Scott Jennings' response. So take a look at this clip.
Executive order here. Here's what it says about Chris Krebs. Krebs, through CISA, falsely and baselessly denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. That is in a presidential executive order, almost as if Bigfoot was real. What is going on?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be with you. I think this is probably one of the most dangerous things that we've seen from him. And we've seen a lot of craziness but this is now taking the department and completely weaponizing against two people who just disagreed with him. One who told the truth and was involved as a witness in the congressional inquiry, and then somebody else who has said some things about him. The problem is we're back to now what he complained about throughout the campaign and his presidency, and that was that the Justice Department had somehow been weaponized. And now you see him essentially given a mandate and a directive by way of this presidential order to the department to move forward.
He signed 2 executive orders ordering investigations, weaponizing his Justice Department against people who just disagree with him.
So basically what you've seen in that clip was Abby setting it up for you. She's basically telling you what is going to be talked about in the segment and talked about the investigation and what is happening, what Donald Trump is doing, which is so unlawful and it's immoral, it's scary. Considering we live in a democracy, we live in a republic. So the fact that our sitting president is going after his political opponents should scare everyone. But let's get into Shermichael's response and we'll talk about his response on the other side.
How do you justify that?
I mean, look, politically, my advice to the president on this one would be continue to focus on strengthening the economy. You got to figure out a way to bring down cost. Keep doing what you're doing as it pertains to immigration. We need to increase chip manufacturing within the United States. There are several political things that I think that he needs to do.
All right, hold on. Okay.
So
all right, Shermichael, I get it. Yes, he should focus on the economy.
Yeah, he should.
But what do you think about the fact that he's targeting his political enemies using executive orders and telling his Justice Department?
But we are focused on it, Shermichael, and you just said, but Shermichael,
can I answer?
But you haven't answered. But you have not answered.
I did answer. I just didn't answer the way you wanted me to answer. You don't get to dictate my comments to my response on this show.
But your comments are not directed to the issue. The very question that she asked. And furthermore,
the
Shermichael, you
focus
just
should
said
be
on this set, the last segment, you talked about this not being an authentic.
Tiffany, 1 second.
Go ahead, Tiffany. Go ahead.
I mean, listen, Shermichael, you're a friend of the show. You're my friend. Please answer the question.
I answered the question the way I want.
No,
nobody's going to dictate the way I answer questions on this show. You may not like the way I answered the question, but I gave an answer. No, I don't like that. We're not going to do dictating reply the way I want you to reply. Then just don't ask me a question if you don't like my response. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Michael, you don't get to.
Do we not live in a democracy now? I mean, we talked a lot about a democracy tonight. I guess not on this show.
You don't get to just change the subject to avoid having to say something that might be perceived as negative about Donald Trump.
No, Abby, you just didn't like my answer to your question.
Well, that's what it seems like. If you were a politician, a regular person on the street would say, well, that sounds like spin to me.
No, you asked a question.
Because it does sound
and
like
my
spin.
response to your question was, instead of doing this, the president should be focused on X, Y, and Z.
May I
that is
respond
an
to
answer
this?
to the question.
When I said this is why it's so dangerous, and this is an example of why it's so dangerous, and that is because nobody wants to speak out against it. You know, we've been waiting for Republicans, whether it be in Congress or wherever they are, to come up and actually say that we're not going to let Trump's power go unchecked. And when he does something wrong, something illegal, something outside the bounds of the history and the department, they sit quiet.
Is it illegal? Do you believe what he did is illegal?
Absolutely.
Why is it illegal?
If you read the Justice Department manual, one of the things it talks about, actually, there's a whole section on whether or not the White House can have direction or communication for a prosecution.
You see the table exploded because I'm gonna give you a little bit of a backstory regarding Shermichael. Shermichael is a Republican strategist. I like Shermichael. I don't agree with his political ideologies, but he's respectful, he's knowledgeable, and like I said, I disagree with some of his perspectives, but he's never objectionable. He's never a person you're like, oh my God. He's always like, he'll speak and he's respectful. And after he speaks, it's like, okay, I don't agree with that, but he seems like he's a fairly decent person. What bothered me and scared me, and it made me I felt sorry for him. Because he knew not to answer the question correctly, because he's afraid of backlash. He's afraid of being ostracized in the Republican Party. That is very scary. When we have a Republican strategist, we have a pundit that refuses to tell the truth because he knows that the leader of his party wants to be a dictator. He knows the leader of his party is either you fall in line completely or you're ostracized, or you will be investigated. And so I felt sorry for the fact that he couldn't answer the question correctly. He knows better. I've been watching Shermichael on CNN for years. He knows better. He decided to obfuscate. He decided not to answer the question directly because he's afraid to. And in the United States of America, we should not be afraid of to express our political ideologies. It's just as if you guys watch other content creators like your Brian Taylor Cohen, he's huge on YouTube. David Pakman is huge on YouTube. You have content creators coming out and saying, well, if my page is taken down, or if I'm sued by the Department of Justice, or someone comes after me, that is scary. That in this country, people are worried about like someone coming after them because they have a different political ideology. And so I know Tiffany Cross and Anna Navarro, they were kind of yelling at Shermichael. I felt sorry for him. I literally felt sorry for him because you can tell he was afraid to give his true opinion, which is so scary in this country. Everybody should be paying attention to this. It is the reason people say that Donald Trump wants to be a dictator. It's the reason that people keep yelling dictatorship, because of things like this. You have a Republican strategist who knows better. He's been on CNN for years. He knows better. He's afraid to say the truth because he's afraid of someone coming after him or repercussions from his party and from the leader of his party, which is so disturbing. And everybody should pay attention to this. So now let's get into what Scott Jennings said.
Dangerous, and that is because nobody wants to speak out against it. You know, we've been waiting for Republicans, whether it be in Congress or wherever they are, to come up and actually say that we're not going to let Trump's power go unchecked. And when he does something wrong, something illegal, something outside the bounds of the history and the department, they sit quiet.
Is it illegal? Do you believe what he did is illegal?
Absolutely.
Why is it illegal?
If you read the Justice Department manual, one of the things it talks about, actually there's a whole section on whether or not the White House can have direction or communication for a prosecution. That's in there today. Frankly, I'm surprised they didn't scrub it yet, but it's actually in there. They're not allowed to do that. The reason is because you have to keep the department to be completely nonpartisan. That's the charging decision.
You don't think that the head of the executive branch can have law enforcement priorities?
I think when you call and say go after a political enemy, that's illegal and wrong. And I think and you know, the tide always turns and the pendulum swings here. When the Democrats are back in the White House, I imagine the Republicans are going to scream bloody murder if the president, the Democratic president, calls the department and says, go after, let's go after the Trump kids and see what happens.
I mean, I'm curious, like, are you suggesting that you don't think that it's wrong to go after political enemies?
Here's what I think. I think the security clearance, let me just address the order.
I'm going to have to do the same thing I just did to Shermichael, in fairness to my friend over there. Because my question to you was, do you think that it is right or wrong to go after, for the president to use the Justice Department to go after his political enemies?
I think it is fine for the president to express law enforcement priorities. I think that the Department of Justice should exercise the same judgment that they would exercise on anyone else as it relates to whether someone should be criminally investigated. But here's what I believe about the order in total. The security clearances, fine. There's far too many people with security clearances. I don't have a problem when they take them away. Reviewing access and dissemination of information, perfectly fine, because we do know some oversteps occurred. Looking at whether the government was involved in censorship, which we know they were, perfectly fine. But I think
he's talking about censorship of his lie.
He's alleging. Other issues,
hold on, Scott.
Related to COVID.
He is alleging that CISA censored his lie that the election was stolen. It is not true that the election was stolen. Chris Krebs told the truth, and now he's being targeted by the government with an executive order.
Right.
I guess it shouldn't be. I don't think it should be hard to just say, this is not what the government should be doing. This is not what the president should be doing, because if the shoe, to Michael's point, were on the other foot, as you claimed that it was, you thought that was a huge scandal.
Again, I think I think the president should be able to express his views about these issues, but I think the Department of Justice ought to exercise the same judgment that it would use on any other kind of investigation. Now, what these guys did and whether it deserves a criminal investigation, I don't know. You're a lawyer, I'm not, but I do know this, that, like in the case of Miles Taylor, was working in the government anonymously, obviously disseminating information publicly that he should not have been doing.
Like what?
Well, I mean, he was anonymously writing pieces for the New York Times and stating publicly that he was trying to undermine the government of the United States that he was supposedly working for.
What did he disseminate that he was legally not allowed to disseminate?
Great thing to find out. He was a high-ranking position at the Department of Homeland Security.
He wrote an op-ed.
What did he have access to? I don't know. What did he disseminate to people you don't know about?
He wrote an op-ed and he wrote a book. So what's the allegation?
I think anybody who held a high-ranking position in a Homeland Security department like he did, we know what they did publicly. I'd love to know what he did privately.
They're not allowed to talk about their experiences when they leave government? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm saying that he clearly used his position to try to undermine the sitting president of the United States when he had it. I know what he did publicly now. I don't know what he did privately. I think it's worthy of investigation.
We've seen the clip where the legal analysts basically say, yes, what Donald Trump done, what he did was illegal. It's unlawful. It's not supposed to happen in this country. And then Scott Jennings basically goes on to say that, like, yes, Trump can have these people investigated. And he tries to say, well, we know these people they were working for the administration, but they didn't hold the same ideologies and beliefs as the administration, so they were basically speaking out about it. But how is that wrong? How is that wrong to have different political ideologies, even because sometimes they hold over, no, Bentley, I'm sorry, my dog, my baby. Sometimes you'll have holdovers from the prior administration. So say, for instance, if Biden was a Democrat, some people in his administration, because they were highly qualified or whatever the case, they may stay onto those roles into the Trump administration. But as long as they're serving the country, as long as they're serving the Constitution, it shouldn't matter. Political differences shouldn't matter, because we are not a country that has a cult where every single person has to walk in lockstep with you. So that should be welcomed. different opinions, different ideologies, like bipartisan should be welcomed, not frowned upon. And so the fact that Scott Jennings was like, well, they didn't agree with the president. Okay, we don't live in a dictatorship. They don't have to agree with the president. They don't have to fall in line completely with the president in order to work for him. As long as they are serving the country, as long as they are serving the Constitution, they are not to serve a man. They are to serve the country. And so the fact that Scott was pushing this whole, well, they didn't fall in line with Donald Trump. We don't live in China. We don't live in Russia. So they don't have to. It's scary. When I was watching this segment, the whole time I was like, oh my God. You have two Republicans basically saying, yes, Donald Trump can be a dictator. Yes, he can go after his political opponents. Yes, he can investigate people who disagree with him about his lie that he won the 2020 election. He literally, this is how emboldened Donald Trump is. He literally put this in legislation to go after these people because they do not agree with him that he won the 2020 election. No matter your political ideologies, no matter what side you're on, this should scare everybody. Everybody. I don't care how right-wing you are. I don't care how much of a Republican you are. We have a Constitution. Are you going to serve the man or are you going to serve the Constitution? Are you going to follow Donald Trump or are you going to follow the Constitution? Because we know this is unlawful. This is not how we do it in this country. You cannot go after people because they don't agree with you in this country. That's what they do in Russia. So I watched this clip yesterday and I swear, I was like, this is scary. It's scary to hear Brian Taylor Cohen and David Pakman and some of the others basically say, well, if my channel is taken down, because they have different political ideologies. If I get sued or somebody come after me, this is the way that you can still get some of my content or whatever. People are literally bracing themselves for political retribution because they're afraid of how our president is moving and what he's doing. Again, no matter your political ideologies, this should be scary to everyone. That is my commentary regarding that. I will talk to you guys later. Like, comment, and subscribe, and have a phenomenal Friday. Bye.